right, well, it is 2 o'clock Pacific time, so we'll get started. For those that don't know me, my name is Hunter Chumbley. I'm the Horizon Pilots Executive Council Chair and Captain on the E-175. Welcome to October Pilot Chat. Someone's changing stuff on my notes. Just to get started, we're going to start with our attorney, actually, from the 1224 local, Paul Rudder. One of the things we've been hearing lately is a lot of questions on the COVID mandate executive order and the company's process to implement that or our requirement to be vaccinated. So we have Paul here. We're hoping that he'll just briefly explain from a legal standpoint what the order is and maybe define some of the possibilities that the OSHA requirements can give us, and then our process moving forward as a union on what we're hoping to accomplish by working with the company. So Paul, if you're available, we'll turn it over to you.
Hello, Hunter. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, came on.
All right. I think that was a yes. Is that right, Hunter?
Yeah, yep, we can hear you.
Okay, good deal. So let me tell you what I know. And I know all of the airlines across the country have been struggling with this. All of them have been reacting as quickly as they can to developments that are happening every day. So this goes back to September 9th. President Biden issued an executive order 14042. And that executive order mandated that all federal departments and agencies include a clause in their contracts with government contractors. And the clause would require the government contractor to comply with guidance published by a Safer Federal Workforce Task Force. The clause would be added to existing contracts as they were extended or options were exercised. Clause would be added to all new contracts with the government on or after November 14th. So that was the executive order. It took two and a half weeks for this Safer Federal Workforce Task Force to issue their guidance and to tell all the contractors and the government what this clause would contain. So September 24th, this task force comes out, and the guidance, it has a few things in it. Most importantly, it requires all contractors to ensure that all of their employees are fully vaccinated for COVID-19, unless the employee is legally entitled to an accommodation. And the deadline in the guidance, not entirely clear, and it's going to depend on your individual government contracts, but most of it indicates a deadline of no later than December 8th. So that's one executive order that's out there. The guidance has been issued. Everybody who has a federal contract with the government, they're concerned that within the next week or two, or maybe more, the next time they get a contract option amendment, it's going to include a clause that says all of your employees need to be vaccinated. There's another executive order that's out there too. This one issued around the same time. It was issued by President Biden to instruct OSHA to put forth guidance on making workplaces safe for COVID. And that guidance would not mandate vaccinations for employees. Instead, that guidance would give an employer a choice. And the employer would either have to mandate vaccinations, or the employer could choose to implement a regimen of testing, weekly testing for employees. That order would only apply to large employers, 100 employees or more. OSHA was asked to issue guidance. Well, OSHA hasn't done that. So I don't know what it says. The only people who do know are in the federal government. I read that earlier today, OSHA gave their draft to the Biden administration to review. Typically, that review takes months. but I know the administration is trying to expedite this out. It's possible they get it out within a week or two. Right now, Horizon Air and all of the other airlines that I work with, they're mostly worried about the federal contractor mandate. And that's because the executive order is out, the task force guidance is out. Some of the carriers that we are working with that do DoD contracts, US Transcom contracts, they are already seeing this clause inserted into their agreements. And that's because when you're the government, turns out it's pretty easy to add a requirement and amend the deal. I should note, and this is very important, the executive order, the task force guidance, they built an exception into the order. And the exception recognizes existing law, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it says that if you're an employee who has Title VII, a sincerely held religious belief that would keep you from getting vaccinated, or if you're an employee who, under the ADA, has a disability or some other medical issue that prevents you from being vaccinated, you can go to your employer and you can request an exemption. And the process for doing this, it's not new. These laws have been around for a long time. HR at Alaska Air Group and Horizon Air, if you were to look in their people services guide, you'll see what to do if you have a religious belief or a disability that requires accommodation. It's already set forth in there. This exemption is available to the pilot group. It's available to all the pilot groups in the country. The big question is, how is the company going to accommodate people who apply for this exemption? The company is not required to expend extra money or take on any unreasonably burdensome obligations with someone who can't get vaccinated. So we saw an airline like United. It had 3% of its employee group apply for religious or disability exemptions. It granted a lot of those exemptions, but the accommodation it provided was to put all those employees on unpaid leave. Compare that with some of the other employers. For example, today, I was reading about an airline which just granted a religious accommodation, and the accommodation they provided was not unpaid leave like United Air. Instead, it was that the person comply with masking requirements. And while they're in the cockpit, they don't have to wear a mask, and socially distance when they're out of the cockpit. And that's, frankly, the accommodation is very similar to what we're all doing today when we're in airports. So the point I'm trying to make is there is a way for people who have these protected statuses to ask for relief, to request an accommodation. And if the accommodation provided is reasonable, we might end up in a situation where a lot of people are, who have a protected status are accommodated in a way that is livable and workable. I'll note that there are a couple very interesting cases out there that I'm following, and I try to stay up to date on what's going on because your Horizon Exco, the other groups I work with, they all have very good questions, and they all want to make sure that they're doing the right thing for their members. I am actively following 2 cases against United Air. One is an individual. It's Barrington v. United Airlines. And Barrington is a ramp services supervisor. She asked for and was granted a religious accommodation. United put her on unpaid leave. That was their accommodation. There's another case, Sembrano v. United Airlines. This one's very interesting. It's a class action of employees, just like Barrington, who asked for accommodation due to religious or medical reasons. And United's accommodation, again, was to place them on unpaid leave. The Sembrano case, the judge just a couple days ago issued what is called a temporary restraining order. And he ordered United to do two things. The first was to not place any employee on unpaid leave if they had been granted an exemption. And the second was to continue to accept requests for religious and medical accommodations. The judge did that because he found that if he didn't do that, and if he let these people be put on unpaid leave, it would cause irreparable harm he couldn't fix. Understand that it's not a decision on the merits. The judge was very clear and explicit that he wasn't deciding whether United Airlines accommodation was correct or not. What he was doing was buying the court time to hear some of the parties' arguments and make a good final decision. But he does seem sympathetic to the plaintiffs. The court is in Texas. The judge is in Texas, which they appear sympathetic to certain causes out there. So I'm very interested in this case. The temporary restraining order, the TRO, it expires October 26th. They have an important hearing October 22nd. And I expect that hearing will result in some guidance that airlines like Horizon Air and others across the country will be very interested in. I will note a couple other things just very briefly. The process for requesting these exemptions, it is clear, it's established. You have the ADA, you have Title VII, you have religious objections, or you have disability or medical objections. I've had some people contact me and say, well, I have a personal feeling, a political belief that, this isn't right. And I am respective of that belief, but understand under the current legal framework, it does not entitle an individual to an exemption if this executive order applies to your work group. I will say the same thing with natural immunity. Some of the airlines I work with, they have pilots who fly to Europe. And in Europe, if you want to get into a place, you can either show that you've been vaccinated or you were previously infected and have acquired natural immunity. In the United States, under these executive orders, natural immunity doesn't matter. It's not enough. So that's another thing that doesn't count for much. I think the last thing I'd like to address, I'll note that your leadership group are working very hard on this issue. They've asked me a lot of tough questions. They've got a meeting tomorrow with their management group to discuss how this is going to work at Horizon. And, it's going to be the union's position that the company should negotiate with the union on how to handle this. One of the things the union will be very interested in is the type of accommodations they're able to provide. Because again, it's quite possible that the United model right at the outset of putting everyone on unpaid leave is going to become disfavored in the courts. And I'm already seeing other employers say, we don't need that here. We're willing to do our current model of masking and distancing. Hunter, unless there's anything else you'd like me to throw out, I think that's my take.
Nope, I appreciate the information. I think one of the things that we've been reached out the most about is about COVID vaccines lately, and we're doing our best. This is something that we deal with every single day. I know there hasn't been a ton of information. We've tried to share as much as we can, but without firm details from the government and from the company, putting something out doesn't really benefit anyone, especially when it's not set in stone yet. So we have been working, again, as Paul said, we have a meeting with the company tomorrow, and we're doing our best to protect as many of our pilots here to make sure that whatever accommodations you need to seek, that they are honored and that we can keep you employed without any repercussions. We are getting some questions on the side, and so I think this one actually may be a good one for us to ask now. If the company allows itself to be deputized by the federal government as an enforcement agency, what is our responsibility to our industry to set the precedence of no? What's the next thing they use our livelihood against us on as coercion for? And will the union stand up for us to be on the side of the government over takeover of our industry? I didn't read the last part, sorry, but you know, anything that you do that is a work action is actually illegal. So whatever you choose to do, keep that in mind. We unfortunately have to abide by this mandate. It is a presidential mandate, and the company is just is trying to abide by it because they have a large amount of federal contracts they get profit from. So I'm not sure that there's anything. There are a few choices that you do have. Again, Paul covered those. You know, the religious exemption, the medical exemption, and then you know, the disability stuff, or seeking vaccination. Paul, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
I do. Thank you. Yeah, I know that there are some interesting challenges from, well, for example, the Texas governor a couple days ago, he put out his own state order that no one has to get vaccinated. And, you know, there are people debating what that means. The Arizona Attorney General a couple days ago filed some kind of challenge against the Biden administration. So, you know, there are going to be states, mostly governors, sometimes individuals who challenge these on interesting constitutional grounds or you know, state federalism grounds. From the union's perspective, our priority is ensuring that the Railway Labor Act is followed. That's the law that governs, you know, who we are and how we handle our labor relations with management. So one of the things we're exploring this week is, you know, during our meeting, making sure that the company doesn't implement anything unilaterally that it's required to negotiate with us. And I think that's where our perspective is focused. If you've been following Southwest, just a couple days ago, they filed an amended complaint in court in Southwest SWAPA. They said that our employer, you know, unilaterally implemented policies that they should have negotiated to exhaustion with the union. And, you know, Southwest is correct. If a union is going to make a challenge, it'll be to that. If individuals are going to make a challenge, most of those challenges will be concerning the accommodations, which is what you're seeing in the Sembrano and the Barrington cases. Hope that helps.
Yep. Do you want me to do the question up there as well? It looks like there's a question in the chat. If accommodations are made and a mask must be worn when it's been scientifically proven that vaccinated or unvaccinated transmit the virus similarly, therefore requiring a mask seems to be putting a mark on a person, but does nothing more. So I don't think masks are going away anytime soon, and I could be speaking out of turn, but that's the way that it looks right now. So if the accommodation is that they're willing to let you remain unvaccinated but still comply with masks and social distancing, I think that's you know, from our standpoint, that may be a win in keeping someone's job, especially if everyone's going to have to wear the mask anyways. So those are some things that we don't know what the accommodations that the OSHA ruling is going to actually provide the company. And again, those are things that we think that the company should be negotiating with us on. And so we're working on that, and we'll keep you guys updated as we can on what we come up with. Hopefully that answers that question. All right, moving along, it looks like Joel's next up with hotel stuff.
Yep, just a quick update. I think as we've mentioned in previous chats, the arbitration did return an award. We are in the process of kind of working through that with the company. One of the first steps in the process, we had a meeting to sit down with them and review the award and kind of highlight any points that we maybe had questions about or were needing clarification from the arbitrator. So our next step from there is going to be to take that back, reconvene and discuss with the arbitrator and get clarification any of those points that we had questions about. As far as current things, please keep the reports coming, as I always say. If I don't know about it, I can't fix it. A recent thing that's propped up is transportation, and that's kind of two different things. One is the COVID policy that is still in effect with Air Group. That is that it's Horizon crew only. No civilians or other air crew members can be on the transportation to and from hotels. So if that is happening to you, where a hotel van is having other guests with the hotel on board and it puts you in an awkward position, please do file a report. Let me know about it and I'll follow up with the company. The other portion is hotel vans or third-party vans, not being there on time, or just having issues with cleanliness of vans, maintenance, and that sort of thing. That's been a lot of that in the system with excessive wait times for vans and transportation, and particularly now it's noticeable just because we have so many minimum rest overnights with our parents. So please keep reports coming about that, and I can follow up on those particular situations. That's about all I have for updates. So I think it's on the back.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. A couple things from me. I'll start off with a Miss Award update. Most of the pilot group probably isn't aware. This really only pertains to the Seattle, Alaska pilots, but I think just for transparency, let everyone know what's going on there. Last month, we discovered that there was a good amount of flying that was withheld from the Seattle, Alaska base. I won't get into the details of why, but we called a Miss Award on that and have been working to get that resolved. We have a settlement in the works. Hopefully we'll see that in the next, hopefully by the end of the week. And that should be resolved and hopefully won't happen again. Again, just wanted to let the pilot group know that that had happened, but it's not important that we get into the weeds with that one. A couple of grievances that have come up with scheduling. Last month we discussed on the pilot chat the overnight coverage as it pertains to dropping trips. We've officially filed a group grievance on behalf of the entire pilot group on that subject. For those who aren't aware what's happening, our contract requires a certain amount of reserves to be available in order to complete a trip drop. It's supposed to be total reserves for that day, but the company has been using the 25% of the overnightable reserves is what they're calling it. We discussed it with the company this morning. They're still working on their response and how they stand on the issue. So I don't really have an update on there, but aside from that, we have filed a group grievance on that. Golden Day grievances. This was also something that was brought up last month. Had a couple pilots who had run into some issues with Golden Days not being awarded on the first couple days of the month. I think we've made some progress in settling that as well. And I think we might get something out of it for the smaller bases, specifically Medford and the Seattle, Alaska base, where it's pretty much impossible to meet the 10% requirement for Golden Days. So hopefully we'll get somewhere with that, but I think that's going to be resolved, and we'll have more details to come on that. On the topic of Golden Days, we did have a pilot get assigned a trip into a Golden Day that followed a reserve day. Just a reminder that that is not allowed per the contract, and if you're on reserve or even a line holder being junior man into something and the company tries to put you on a trip into your Golden Day, it's not allowed, and you can tell that to the crew scheduler. Probably better to discuss with the crew controller. All indications point to they won't do it again, and they recognize that it was a mistake. So just a reminder there. We also had a question that was submitted prior about the October bid reports, the reports that get sent out from the company on all the lines for all the different bases. October kind of got busy, or I guess September, the end of it, got really busy with a couple things with the PBS committee. Mark Roberts is the one who puts that together. I don't know if he's on the call, but he was really busy with a lot of PBS stuff. So the October bid reports did not get sent out. And I reached out to him before the call. I don't think we're going to send it out just because we didn't want to get confused with October, November. November did just get sent out. I did see the email. So you guys should see that. If you have questions on the October bid, feel free to reach out to me or send an email to the stewards and I can get you whatever report you want because I do have those available. But I don't think we're going to send them out at the moment unless it becomes absolutely necessary. That's all I have for scheduling. So I think we're on a cap.
I don't have a whole lot more to ask. I'll be working a lot on the vaccination issues. That Hunter gave a good summary of where we're at on that, and Paul, of course, gave us a great summary on kind of the legal landscape on that right now. We're still trying to figure this all out. Stuff kind of trickles down from the government, as you saw, trickles through the company, and then down to us. And we're trying to put together our position on that and reiterate our belief that the company just can't unilaterally make these kind of decisions regarding the pilot group without talking to us. And it sounds like this Hunter mentioned, we'll be talking to them tomorrow again. I'm just trying to find out what some of their plans are, what they're hearing, and start giving some more input as to where we think we need to be involved and need to take that into consideration. That's all I really have. Keely?
Let's see. I just have a quick, I guess, reminder. It was sent out in our snapshot on October 8th, but the commuter registration form location changed in PeopleSoft. So if you're having a hard time finding that, go check out the snapshot that was sent out because there's graphics and instructions there that'll help give a visual on where to find it. David.
Also, just a real quick reminder, really, that we're really ramping up with training right now, which really means two things. One, lots of you might be going through captain upgrade, maybe switching fleet types, or maybe you're a new hire. And we just want to remind everyone that there is a training committee with the union that has a lot of really great resources available to you. And we encourage you to reach out if you have any questions about the training footprint or material, anything along those lines. Mark Pebler is the chair. I'm the EXCO sponsor, but anybody within the union is happy to help out. And then second thing on that note is that inevitably there will be some visits to the TRB or PRB process due to training failures. And if that does happen, we just want to make sure that, if not your first stop, your second stop should be contacting a union rep. Just for conversation, we can be there to mentor, to make sure that proper process is followed, and that you have all of the resources that you need to be successful. So again, it's just a reminder that we're there for you and encourage you to use the resource.
I guess we're gonna roll back to me for a second. I have to ad lib for a minute because I wound up on another important call, so I wasn't able to be in our little prep here. But just a couple of things I'll talk about. One is a reminder. I think about 2 weeks now ago, we sent out a comm talking about some overflying stats. I think that stuff is important. There's some education in there. It's a little dense at points, it's a long communication, but it kind of really goes into our process of how trips are built and things like that. So we do think it's important information. We did also list at the end some questions that we think are important of pilots to ask the company. So it might be nice to look back in your email to see that. I know there's a company pilot chat coming up next week, so that might be a worthy consideration to look at those questions and consider asking those on the pilot chat or submitting it ahead of time. We are getting more pilot awareness on how our trips happen and why we see some inefficiencies, and hopefully getting more people to question the company why we're seeing this will help show that it's important to us and that they need to make some changes. The other reminder I'll mention is the Washington long-term care thing. If you have questions about that, feel free to send us something or raise your hand. but we did send out some reminders on that. The general gist is if you want to apply for, if you want to be exempt from the tax permanently, now's your time to do so. But it is hard, it's becoming harder and harder to find plans, private insurance plans. So if you want to do that, you're going to need to look pretty hard for it. And you need to do that sooner rather than later because you have to have the policy by November 1st. So it's coming up here real fast. If you have questions on it, send it along. There's a lot of questions over the law itself. There's, including if it's going to stand. I don't want to comment on that because I obviously don't know if it's going to stand or not. But there's a lot of complexity to that one as well. But that's all I have really off the top of my head.
Chris Meyer, you've had your hand raised for a while. If you want to
Yeah.
unmute.
Yeah, sure. Just a quick question going back to Mac with the missed bids through Alaska. I know it's a very small percentage of those listening or that care right now, but do we have any assurances that November bid had everything available?
As far as I know, yes, they should not be doing it again. I'll just put it that way because the miss award resolution process. I'll just say we will make sure it won't happen again. So.
Cool. I was just looking at the awards and 8 FOs in the base, 10 lines worth of flying, and I was given reserve, and I can build myself like a 90 credit line with what's left in open time. So it looks a little funny to me, but I can send an email on the side for that.
I'll look at it and I can talk with the rest of the PBS committee and see what they're seeing there, and we can take a look at it and get back to you.
One thing to
Cool.
mention, November is a holiday month. That means unstacking can occur to a greater extent. So it's possible you just got unstacked onto reserve for a covered award. We're going into 2 months in a row? No, 2 months in a row of holiday months. So
Sure.
we are see some unstacking stuff. So it's possible that could be at play.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool. Any other questions from the rest of the pilot group? Do you have a question? You can either type it. It says, if one is not a resident of Washington, do I understand that the state of Washington is still planning to tax non-residents under the Long-Term Care Act? That is actually true. I think, you want to take it?
Yeah. So the long and short of it is, yes, Washington State would right now would intend to do that, would intend to charge that tax to anybody who is based in Washington. So if you live in Montana and commute to Seattle, they would intend to tax you. Now, there are two things at play. The first one is per the law, they're not going to deduct the tax until if you're under a contract like we are, we're under a collectively bargained agreement. Until that contract is renegotiated, they're not going to be taking the tax. So you wouldn't see it at January 1 just because of that. The other aspect is Alaska Air Group as a whole is taking the position that because it's a state law, it doesn't apply to a crew member because of the various federal laws there. That's a position we, in general, that the company thinks that that state law doesn't apply. We don't agree with that. There's actually considerable litigation going on over that. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds, but right now, yes, in theory, Washington wants to charge it, but you're not going to see that as of January 1. However, if you want some insurance for the future, you might want to look at getting the insurance because, and applying for the exemption, because if it is determined to be legal and if it is determined to be, or excuse me, if the law stands and then the state law issue gets taken over to the fact of yes, state law does apply, then all of a sudden you might find yourself getting charged this tax. So it might be kind of a cheap insurance to get it now, because if you want to go to a major carrier, there's no cap on the income limit. So you can right now at Verizon, yeah, maybe the state insurance is cheap, but you go to a couple year FO, even at Alaska, Delta, wherever, and you're still living in Washington or based in Washington, it could be a very, very considerable tax. There was another question I think we wanted Paul to answer. Put you on the spot, Paul.
No, not a problem. So I got, let me read through this. It says, I wanted to ask the lawyer about the mask issue. I agree keeping the job is good when you are wearing a mask only because you are not vaccinated. Then when others are required to wear a mask, again, when both. So I think he's asking the suggestion that if you apply for an exemption and it's granted, the company, the employer is required to accommodate the employee by not requiring a vaccination, but the employer can impose other, can ask the employee to do other things, right? So I was looking at the federal task force guidance when I saw this question come through, and the guidance says that if you are a federal contractor and you have an employee who is not fully vaccinated, that employee is required to comply with the masking and the physical distancing requirements. So the question about whether it's contra federal law, if someone's required to wear a mask where other people aren't, you have the federal guidance saying, if you're not vaccinated, you should be wearing a mask. So I don't think you'll find much support from the government on that being discriminatory. I'll throw this out there, and this can cut, it can cut both ways, good ways and bad ways. The accommodations that the employer offers tomorrow, let's say it is just masking and distancing, which almost everybody is subject to today and will be subject to for a little bit longer. A month from now, 2 months from now, let's say Canada closes their borders to unvaccinated people, or let's say everybody starts lifting restrictions. The company and the employer can now come back and look at the accommodation and say, we no longer need masks. Or worse, they could come back and look at the accommodation and say, well, this is no longer working and we need to change it. So I think because we're all doing masking now in airports, because distancing is still a thing, as an initial accommodation, it's a pretty good one. I'm worried about the future because more and more governments seem to be putting more and more conditions on travel. I hope that helps.
Next question is in the pilot chat. It says a pilot has an adverse reaction to vaccination that has an effect on their medical status. Are there any protections provided to them? Those are some things that we'd like to cover in the MOU, but I believe Paul can back me up by saying there is some long-term disability coverage that we have here at Horizon Air that would protect you. And if you have, I know a while back that the IVT was offering a loss of medical insurance. So if you do have something like that, that does kick in as well. But maybe Paul, you can talk a little more to that topic.
Yeah, the easy answer is if you don't negotiate anything extra with the employer, you are entitled to all of the benefits and the protections available under the current contract, which would be family medical leave. During the leave, you can use your sick leave, your vacation, your short-term disability pay, and at some point transition to your long-term disability benefits. There's a lot of discussion right now about whether a workers' compensation claim would be legitimate. And what I'm hearing lawyers say is, if you are required to get the vaccine and you get the vaccine because your employer told you to do it, you have a very interesting, colorable claim for workers' compensation benefits. Workers' compensation is a bureaucratic mess, but it's a bureaucratic mess that provides for pay continuation when you have a long-term disability, and it can provide for the payment of your healthcare costs. I've had questions. It's really interesting, Hunter. I've had a couple people, a couple Horizon pilots and a couple pilots from other groups who've heard rumors that, for example, if you had an adverse reaction, the disability plan wouldn't cover you. And I don't I have looked in our disability plan. I see nothing in our disability plan that would exclude you from coverage. I've also heard people say that the life insurance plan might not pay out if, the worst case scenario happens, somebody has an adverse reaction to a vaccination and passes away. I see nothing in life insurance plans that would exclude that kind of coverage too. Under most life insurance plans, a death is a death is a death. The only time they don't pay is suicide. And if you want to talk really macabre, sometimes you'll see life insurance plans that will say, we will pay out unless you commit suicide within the first year or two of coverage. So I'm not worried about that type of exclusion preventing disability or life insurance from paying out to somebody who would happen to have an adverse reaction to vaccination.
Cool. Thanks for that. Anyone else have questions on the pilot chat? I think it's *9 to unmute if you're on your phone, and you can raise your hand if you're on the computer.
I've got one here, asked about how would Washington State collect LTC tax if one doesn't live here and it's not deducted from our paycheck? That's a great question, and I apologize if I wasn't really clear earlier. There's a lot of levels to this. That would only apply if one, we've renegotiated a new collective bargaining agreement. So under the state's interpretation, we're now required to pay the tax. And the issue of whether state law applies to us is upheld in court, saying, okay, yes, this state law does apply to crew members. You are required to comply with all these state laws, which would now include this LTC tax. At that point, it would be deducted from the paycheck if you haven't already applied for an exemption.
Any other questions from the pilots?
Got another one just submitted. Would it be possible for the company to publish which days of each month will allow for dropping an e-crew? Realizing it constantly changes, it seems like the number should exist in e-crew somewhere and would bring transparency to the process behind e-crew and help us know which days to try to drop. This is something we know the system isn't transparent, and that's something we're hoping to change. I don't think any of us here want to try to make a promise, but that is something we're aware that the lack of transparency is a big issue. We do have some insight. When I say we, I really should say Mac. So you can send us some questions, but we don't want to inundate him either. So we do eventually want to get more transparency, but I won't want to promise anything now.
Looks like Lowell's typing a question, so we'll give him some time, but I'll answer some questions that we had gotten before. The first question says, we embrace loyalty and reward our best customers. It's aligned with our values of doing the right thing. What changes are needed to allow Horizon pilots to retain their seniority through the Pathways program so they would be starting at Alaska rewarded over those hired externally? We've said this countless times, and I hope you guys understand kind of the position that we have is this Pathways program has not been negotiated with the union. It's not something we have control over, and it's not owned even by Horizon Air. It's owned by Alaska Airlines. There's been no interest in sitting down to have conversations about making that something the union has buy-in on, and the company makes those changes at will. As you've seen, I think there's been a total of 9 or 10 changes to that Pathways program since it's in its initial existence. So while that sounds like a great idea, again, this is owned by Alaska Airlines, and we have zero control over and zero interest in them sitting down with. They have zero interest in sitting down with us. So hopefully that answers that question.
To add on to it a little bit, just like our contract has parameters of how seniority is defined, so it is Alaska's pilot contract. Alaska's pilot contract says seniority begins on day one, just like it does at Horizon. So it's not even necessarily like a management decision at Alaska. It would actually have to be a contractual thing at Alaska too. So there's multiple layers to this onion. One question in the chat: is the company dragging its feet on the implementation of Rainmaker? I thought it was originally supposed to be implemented in Q4 2021. No, we have not seen any indication of dragging feet. There were some programming hiccups a couple months ago that pushed the timeline back a little bit. It's a complex program. I think we're hoping to get an update here, in the next week or so. We're hoping to set up a meeting, I think. We had some traffic back and forth.
Beginning of November, there's a meeting actually.
Okay, beginning of November. It wasn't ever going to be implemented by quarter four. I think we were hoping for some parallel runs in Q4, and hopefully those parallel runs will still start, but hopefully we'll get a better idea early next month. Want to get the next one?
Yep, is the company still expecting us to use sick time or our time off to honor 48-hour restrictions for the FAA? Are they going to offer anything other than $200 and we still be penalized on the Pathways program if that pushes us over 5 sick events? So to cover the very last part of this question first, it is our knowledge that the most recent change to the Pathways program does not include evaluation of your sick time usage. That is one thing the company told us when they presented that to us. So we are trying to get confirmation on that. And that's actually my bad for not sending Eric another email to ask specifically that question. And then to answer the beginning of it, yes, they are still requiring that you use your sick leave. Again, these are things that we think that belong in a written form, in some form or fashion. But as of right now, yeah, the 48-hour restriction from the FAA, it does need to be accommodated by sick leave use or your time off. And then anything other than $200, you'd be surprised. We had many conversations with them that they needed to incentivize that, and they didn't think they needed to. And then all of a sudden they came up with this $200 idea. So I don't know that it's going to get any bigger or smaller, or that they'll even pay it to you.
This is part of the kind of the MOU discussions we're hoping to have with the company.
The next question is from Lowell. The next round of CBA negotiations is the method that AAG is using to pre-allocate training lines before bids versus what my understanding that other airlines have to do to buy the line away from established pilots. Self-conflicting mess, essentially threat to the long-term survival of the airline. 2 years of seniority going back to reserve is pretty indicative of how bad forecasted plan this pipeline is. So it is our goal to get the best language we can out of negotiations. So to answer that question, of course, we want to try and get something better than what we have. We're starting to put together a negotiations team to start putting language together for the different sections. And really what that entails is just reviewing other CBAs to find out what we like and start running with that language. But as you can imagine, every day, well, it feels like every one of my days off is spent on the topic of COVID. And so that has delayed that CBA talks from, or the CBA focus from happening. And it isn't pushed far down the road. We were planning to start 2 years early to really have a head start on things. So we still have plenty of time, but yes, it is our goal to always improve the language in the CBA. Hopefully that answers that question.
I'll add a little bit more color just to what other airlines do. There are airlines that do buy training trips from first officers. There are other airlines that do exactly what we do. There are other airlines that do exactly what we do, but have a limit to it. Republic has a percentage limit of how much flying they can withhold and stuff like that. So there are different ways, and yes, we know this is an issue. I know it's one of my top hot button items. There's an ever-growing list, but yes, we are aware of that, and we do know what other airlines are doing, and would hopefully push towards that.
One other question that was asked before on the IBT election ballot that were just sent out. Do we have any Horizon Alaska crew members on this ballot? We do not. And there are resources. There was an email sent out to the pilot group from Local 1224 last week with a link with information and I think a debate that actually happened between the two different candidates. And so you can do some research. Unfortunately, we aren't legally able to tell you which way to vote, but there is information out there, and I think that email is in your personal email and could guide you the right direction on making that decision. Any other questions from the pilots? Again, *9 if you're on your phone, or you can unmute or raise your hand and we'll call on you. Any questions at all? We do have our attorney on. If for those that joined a little later, if you have a legal question or just want to harass them. We do it pretty regularly. All right. Well, we appreciate you guys attending today. Again, you know where to get reach out to us at exco@horizon or at exohorizon at apa1224.org. And I'm sure many of you guys have our numbers. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. And we appreciate you guys attending today. Enjoy the rest of your day.